We'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay. We'll give it another couple of minutes so that people can take a little quick, get a drink, check a call or whatever break.
So do I guess I need to hit the share the screen?
Yes, I will give you that in just a minute.
Okay.
So Greg, this is Mike Barrett. I started my career in enforcement as a building inspector for West Jordan City.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill Bailey and I started at the same time. I don't know if you remember Bill.
I don't.
Yeah, Paul Hayward was my boss then.
Yeah, I remember Paul.
I'll take this off now and give you the share screen button and you can put your presentation on. And I apologize for misspelling your name, Greg.
Oh, you're fine. Let's see.
You'll want to go to slideshow also. And start from the beginning.
Oh.
Do it one more time.
Oh.
Now go to the left and where it says from the beginning. Keep going over to the left. There you go. Okay, Greg, take it away.
Okay, so let me just make sure we got it here. You can all see that? All right. There's a good chance a lot of you, especially when I noticed the people in on this seminar, why do we need something else about the economic loss rule? It's been heavily litigated, legislated, and yet it just doesn't seem to be able to go away. Before we launch too much into that, I want to make a few comments, if I can, about some of the things that have been said today. It's been very, very interesting to me. I've been litigating construction defects now for like 35 years. And frankly, I kind of love it. I'm sorry we have defective construction. We have too much of it, frankly. We have a lot of mistakes that are made, and of course the constant price pressure forces cost cutting a lot, and we end up with some shoddy construction. And we're going to see some interesting quotes today. I'm going to show you a little bit about that issue. I just want to say, first of all, that my clients have never had a cognitive bias. All of the other attorneys' clients in here have had cognitive bias, but not mine. I actually found that very, very enlightening and interesting to talk about cognitive bias, and it's so easy to recognize in others, and yet sometimes difficult to recognize in yourself, or to get your client to recognize it in themselves. I wanted to say a word about expert depositions and reports here in Utah. To me, reports make more sense than depositions. And I think that that's the path that most people are going these days. I feel like if there ends up being an opinion that is beyond the opinions expressed in the report, you can get it excluded. We recently did that in one of our Kennecott cases. A last minute opinion came out. The judge excluded it, says it's too late. It's, you know, you're beyond the discovery deadline. You're not gonna come out with another opinion. But it is definitely something to watch. I have a thought about expert mistakes. I've been taking notes throughout this. I mentioned that I had an expert die. It was kind of out of the blue, but you know, in some ways it's fair to investigate the health and age of your expert, especially if a litigation is going to take a little while to get there. I had an expert one time come up here from California. I should have hired Eldon, but this guy came up here and started looking over the project, and then he started looking out all this other building going on around him, and he started going around handing out these cases and his card and basically saying, you're making the same mistake that my client made over in this other one over here. And I just knew there was going to be discovery about what he was going around and saying, and we had to let him go. Litigation on construction projects here in Utah, I think, is different than litigation on construction projects in other states in a number of ways. Whoever came up with the tier system of discovery here in Utah didn't have construction defect cases in mind. In our Kennecott cases and in our other some of our other construction cases, it's just not uncommon. By the time you consolidate down the plaintiff's request for documents to have literally millions of documents that you end up having to possibly produce, and finding a way to possibly get out on summary judgment, statute of repose, or the economic loss rule that we're going to be talking about becomes a big, crucial item if you can possibly get there. Let me tell you how I first got involved with the economic loss rule. And I'm going to go clear back to the American Towers case, and you're going to roll your eyes and say, that's old law, that's history, but it's still, I think, applicable. I was riding up the elevator one day in the high-rise building that our firm was in, and I'd run into this fellow a few times, and turns out he was a employee of Great American Insurance. And he asked me on one of these elevator trips, what do you do? What kind of law do you practice? And I said, construction. And he asked me to stop by. And I did. And I sat down with him, and he says, we've got this case that's been brought by the American Towers Homeowners Association. And the litigation is going heavy, and we've got some insureds that are suppliers, and so anyway, the upshot of it is that I was a relatively young lawyer at the time, ended up representing some of these subcontractors and suppliers in the American Towers case, and one of the advantages of that is I got to see some of the top construction defect lawyers operate in the state of Utah. Now, up to that time, I had never heard of, nor was the vernacular, I think, common about the economic loss rule. But they brought a motion for economic law. The CCI Mechanical, I think, was the main defendant there, and they brought a motion for summary judgment on the economic loss rule. And as we all know, a history was made, and the economic loss rule was applied as a judicial concept for the first time. Well, I think for the first time. There may have been some other product liability cases, but anyway. So here's the rule that we ended up with out of American Towers. Of course, it's a long opinion. But damages for inadequate value, costs of repair and replacement of the defective product, or consequent loss of profits are not recoverable in negligence, absent physical property damage or bodily injury. And that is of course, the economic loss rule. And the real consequence of that rule is that people that are not in privity of contract basically have no remedy. So we had a homeowners association that had brought the case, and they had no contract with the mechanical contractor, let alone my clients that were even further a tier away. And I think the developer, even in that case, had gone bankrupt. And this association had no contract with anybody and was left without remedy. The irony of this, as we thought about this result, I thought, again, my naivete astonishes me, but I thought, well, what we've basically done is give all the insurance companies a free ride in this state, because when they get a claim for breach of contract for a defective construction, they're all going to deny coverage because it's a breach of contract. And then the other thing that's going to happen is that we're not going to have. Oh, well, I just thought my career was over. That the economic loss rule was going to basically end construction defect litigation in the state. Now, here's the rationale that was used by the court. The policy reasons supporting the economic loss rule are sound. When a product does not perform or last as long as the consumer thinks it should, the claim pertains to the quality of the product as measured by the buyers and users' expectations that emanate solely from the purchase transaction. Thus, contract principles resolve issues when the product does not meet the user's expectations, while tort principles resolve issues when the product is unsafe to person or property. And again, my perspective on this was, well, this is fine for our large commercial projects where we've got where we have sophisticated people using professionals, architects, and so forth. The big book of specifications they hand you, and the big roll of plans that they hand you, and then they're all incorporated into the contract. This is fine for protecting them. But on the other hand, like a lot of you, I have children that are buying their first homes. Is this realistic for them? If they're buying the home from a developer that didn't actually build it, or from somebody that puts on a cheap warranty, that hands my 23-year-old son a thick thing of documents with lots of fine print. He's barely scraping by to buy his first home. Is he going to be able to really say, we're going to protect ourselves with the contract principles, and I'm going to go through and fairly negotiate a contract that is going to protect me. We'll skip that one. So a few years go by, and my prediction seems to be coming true. I'm not seeing really many construction defect claims. But then comes this Hermansen case, and it involved a realtor who was being sued and didn't have a contract. And here we go. Our formulation of the economic loss rule is that a party suffering only economic loss from the breach of an express or implied contractual duty may not assert a tort claim for such a breach. And then here's these new words that were just kind of stated: and absent an independent duty of care under tort law. And they found that a realtor, under those circumstances of that case, owed an independent duty of care to disclose defects that he was aware of in the property that was being sold. All of a sudden, independent duties of care were being found in all sorts of odd places. And finally, the construction industry went to their legislature and said, boy, we're really getting hit. And we'd like you to codify basically the economic loss rule here in Utah and put it in concrete for how it was with American Towers. We want you to deal with this independent duty problem, especially because we have this case now coming through the courts that we're all frightened of. And that case, of course, was the Davencourt case that was coming through. And so here is Senator Bramble on the Senate floor. And here's what he says about it. He says, in 1996 in the state of Utah, there was a court case called American Towers Owners Association. And in that court case, the judge held that builders who construct low quality housing that does not cause injury to persons or property may still be held liable for damages, but basically should be held to the four corners of the contract, basically. There are now court cases that are trying to go beyond this precedent. And this was the Davencourt case that he saw coming through it. So Senator Bramble, ironically, seems to be wanting to defend the right of builders to construct low quality housing and in the state, and not have these people be liable for not building something better than low quality homes. And maybe there's some logic to it. I mean, if we're all concerned about affordable housing, and maybe those that build low quality, as he puts it, or hopefully inexpensive housing should be protected. Seems what, okay. Here's another quote from Senator Bramble. A case that is before the Supreme Court that is moving beyond the judicial standard of the four corners of the contract is causing real concern that the judicial branch may be going beyond the statutory limits of damages. I don't know what he means by that. So this bill is intended to keep the damages focused on breach of contract unless there's physical damage, physical property damage, or personal injury. Finally, this last quote. What we're doing in this bill really in this American Towers case, and it's summarized in, I believe, 2 sentences in this court case, what we're doing is codifying what this ruling was. That we're trying to take American Towers and we're trying to do away the independent duty, this is how I take it, and codify and freeze in time the American Towers ruling. So now we're going to put in statute the provisions of this case, referring to American Towers. Now, finally, this is Representative McKiff speaking in the House. He says, consistent with the contract that was entered into, you would have protection for the whole construction effort. If it were in a condominium project, then you would have common areas in which every owner has an interest. But you know, that's within the confines of the contract. So he's saying that homeowners can pursue matters within the confine of the contract, but he's saying it's not a negligence remedy, as Senator Urquhart has pointed out. Negligence is a different kind of animal, and that is the one policy decision that is made in this bill which transcends every other policy decision, and that is to not recognize a negligence right of recovery. It's a contract right. So here's what came out of it. And there's a lot of, there's been some recent decisions, but and only one Supreme Court decision that I'm really aware of that's started to address that, and that's, let's see, that's the, let me go back. How do I go back?
Do a left arrow.
Okay, hang on.
On your keypad. There you go.
All right. This is course 78B 4513, which was the result of this legislative inference. And keep in mind, this came down actually before the Davencourt decision came out. An action for, subpoint 2, an action for defective design or construction is limited to breach of contract, whether written or otherwise, including both express and implied warranties. Then 3, for purposes of subsection 2, property damage does not include the failure of construction to function as designed or diminution of value of the constructed property. Okay, let's go skip down to, let's go to 4. Except as provided in 2 and 6, an action for defective design or construction may be brought only by a person in privity of contract with the original contractor, architect, or engineer, or the real estate developer. So again, the legislature is re-enthroning the idea of the contract, but he's saying if you're not in privity, they're saying if you're not in privity, basically you are, you're out of luck for a defective design. Now, are there exceptions? Yeah, let's go to 5. If a person in privity of contract sues for defective design or construction under this section, nothing in this section precludes the person from bringing in the same suit another cause of action to which the person is entitled based on intentional or willful breach of a duty existing in law. So there seems to be some limitations. It's paying some homage to the idea that you can, if there's an independent duty, like it was talked about in the Hermansen case and then later in the Davencourt case, you can bring the cause of action, but it seems to be saying you've got to bring it in the same lawsuit as where you bring in an action for defective design. That is very confusing to me, at least, whether you could bring a separate action apart from a breach of contract, but just bring one based on a duty existing in law. And then the second thing is does the wording says to which the person is entitled based on an intentional or willful breach of a duty existing in law. Does that eliminate negligence? It doesn't come out and say you can't bring an independent duty in negligence. It says that if you're going to bring a duty existing in law kind of claim, it says it's based on intentional or willful. As far as I'm aware, and if there's anybody out there that is aware of something that I'm not, because there certainly could be something, but as far as I am aware, there has been no upper court ruling on whether subpart 5 here specifically eliminates a negligence claim or requires that the claim be intentional or willful. Now, in the Kennecott cases that we brought motions for summary judgment based on this. We thought the plaintiff would come back and say, well, our claims include intentional and willful, that you acted intentionally or willfully, but they did not do that. Now, here's the one. Now, subpart 6 seems to be perhaps the one salvation of the party that is not in privity of contract. Nothing in this section precludes a person from assigning a right under a contract to another person, including a subsequent owner or a homeowners association. So specifically preserved, of course, is the right to assign a contract right. So can you go to a bankrupt developer or somebody that is in privity of contract and get an assignment? And this is specifically saying that you can do it. The cases that I've been involved in, it's been the parties have not done that, or they've done it very belatedly after facing a potential motion for summary judgment based on this. But I think where we need to be aware, if we are going to represent somebody in a construction defect in the state of Utah that is not in privity of contract or is arguably not in privity of contract, we need to be going out and getting the assignments promptly, early, and knowing exactly what the contract is and what the breach of contract is. So my father always told me growing up, he was not a lawyer, but he was a businessman, and he always told me, he says, Greg, no matter how well off you are, no matter how good your life may seem, you are one signature from disaster. And I would add the Greg Simonsen corollary to that. No matter how well off you may be having failed to obtain a signature one step away from disaster. And of course, the big lesson here is number one, get the contract. Number two, make sure that the contract is specific enough in what the performance is. And if you don't have a contract and you have a construction defect claim, you need to go out and get the necessary assignments. Recently, I've had a major career change. I've done major litigation for gosh, more than 30 years. And I thought about retiring altogether, just kind of worn out. And I saw this job come up in my home city, pays a lot less, but the stress is a lot less. And so I have come over here to South Jordan City, and I'm working as a much more relaxed assistant city attorney. But anyway, one of the things I was assigned to work on was one of our employees got a subpoena the other day to come in and testify at a trial. He's in the planning department, and we didn't have any idea what the party was calling him about. So I placed a call to the attorney, and he says, yeah, my client's getting sued for not paying on a house construction project. And we have counterclaims saying that the construction is defective. And I says, well, can I get a copy of the contract and know a little bit more about the case? And says, well, there is no contract. It was just verbal. And so immediately I started thinking, well, can you sue on the contract? And I look at it, and it does say here in 513 that it can be in writing or otherwise under subpart 2. So yeah, I guess he could sue under a verbal contract. But then he says, but we're not suing under contract, we're suing under negligence. And at that point, I'm tempted to say to him, you better go read 78B4 513. Because you're subject to dismissal. Well, I didn't say that. They were a week from trial. I'm going to let them sort it all out. But the point for all of us is, I think everybody here in this seminar today, we're in that construction group. We know about this statute, but there are a lot of attorneys out there that are still bringing causes of action for defective construction with claims of negligence. And what's more is I have found this just repeatedly. Yeah, even with sophisticated plaintiffs' lawyers. I mean, and especially with Davencourt, which we're going to discuss now, that we're still getting negligence claims. And in a way, that's very helpful, because with negligence, we can continue to get usually some kind of insurance coverage. I don't do a lot of insurance coverage issues, and I would love to hear what somebody says, but my sense is that you've got a lot better chance of getting a insurance coverage and defense of your construction defect claim when there's a negligence claim. Okay, so I think everybody is pretty familiar also with Davencourt. In that case, the court found, as the legislature seemed to predict, that there is this independent duty for developers, particularly those that control a homeowners association, which they all pretty much have to do before turnover. court rules that the association may only bring its claims for negligence and negligent misrepresentation in relation to the developer's failure to use reasonable care and prudence. Now you'll notice that the reasonable care and prudence are very different words than willful and intentional that are used in the statute. Failures to use reasonable care and prudence in managing and maintaining the common property, to establish a sound fiscal basis for the association by imposing and collecting assessments, basically imposing and collecting assessments from itself, since prior to turnover, you own the majority of the units. And to disclose all material facts and circumstances affecting the condition of the property that the association is responsible for maintaining. So that's what Davencourt says. And then here is the paragraph that I see in almost every plaintiff's claim based on Davencourt. Implicit in this duty to use reasonable care and prudence in managing and maintaining the common property is the duty for defendants to construct the common property improvements, unit components, and structural components conveyed to the association in a workmanlike manner in the first instance. Doesn't that sound a lot like construction defect to you? So they're attempting to basically end American Towers completely by saying that you've got this duty to supervise the construction as the developer, even if you were not in the contract for construction of the improvements. So we ended up with this new wave of defect construction about 4 years ago. Kennecott, my client, and many other of the attorneys that are attending this today, and their clients are all found themselves enmeshed in this new lawsuit. And these new lawsuits, and we brought a motion for summary judgment based on the economic loss rule, and were successful. But here's a common element of the defense, and the reason this is still important is we don't have a ruling from an appellate court. We have a ruling in the Gables and Sterling Village case, Heinz's case, that says, in addition to the 5 elements of a prima facie case for the implied warranty, the plaintiff must show privity of contract with the developer. This requirement stems from code section, the same economic loss code section. But what we don't have is a specific ruling saying you cannot bring a case for negligence. We don't have a ruling saying going to subpart 5 here of the statute that's saying to which the person is entitled based on intentional or willful breach of duty existing in law. I think we're still waiting for an appellate court to come down and say that provision eliminates a cause of action for negligence, or a cause of action for negligence. So all of these, the Kennecott cases, as I refer to them, but all of these daybreak cases, we had the Eastlake case. That one's been ruled for summary judgment in favor of the defendants on that one based on the economic loss rule, eliminating all the tort claims. That was Judge Faust, and let's see if we can go to his ruling. Okay, here's from Judge Faust's ruling. The statute states that plaintiff's negligence and negligent misrepresentation claims are barred by Utah Code Section 78D 4513. The statute doesn't actually say that. As I've reviewed with you, what it says is that independent duty can be brought on willful or intentional. And then he quotes this: indeed, the statute states that with specific exceptions, an action for defective design or construction is limited to the breach of contract, whether written or otherwise, including both express and implied warranties. But then again, subpart 5, as we've talked about, seems to be saying you can bring this independent duty, which the courts found in the Davencourt matter, under a theory of willful or intentional. Although plaintiff argues that the statute does not apply, and this is where they've been arguing it, the plaintiff argues that the statute does not apply because plaintiff has brought claims for breach of fiduciary duties, not for negligent construction. The complaint makes clear that all of plaintiff's damages arise from construction defects. So that's the fatal weakness that we've mostly seen in these cases, is that if an association wants to bring the claim, first of all, they're not in privity of contract and they have to go out and get their assignments. Second of all, is that if they're going to get any specific damages, they have to assert that the construction was defective. And so far, what the courts have said, once you assert that the construction is defective, you fall under this statute and your claim is limited to the contract. So one of the things that we got to think about going forward is, have we ended specifically the duty, this idea that was brought up first in Hermanson, that there are specific duties that can be claimed, and like the realtor. And if they're there, the courts have certainly shown a propensity in the past to be able to say, we're going to have a construction, we're going to allow a construction defect claim in tort. The second thing that we've got to think about going forward is, if plaintiffs start bringing their claims solely for complaint, are we back in this position where we no longer have insurance coverage in the state of Utah for construction defect? If the moment they bring a negligence claim, absent a separate personal injury or absent a separate property damage claim, have we effectively shielded our insurance companies from any liability for covering construction defect? The third thing we need to think about is, do we really want this kind of protection for low-grade construction? There are arguments that go either way. Now, I'm going to anger some people by saying this, but this is 30 years of litigating construction cases in the state of Utah. And that is that, sadly, we have certainly we have very quality builders in the state, but we really have some crappy builders too. And some of them are out there. Now I'm going to tell you just one story here. I was in a deposition, this was probably a couple of years ago, and this was a large company. If I said their name, you would all recognize who they are. And it became pretty obvious, even from my own experts, that these guys were building crappy homes. I mean, my experts had every motivation from me and who we were representing to come back and offer an opinion that that the plaintiff's claims were not valid and that these were quality construction. But my expert sat down with me and said, these things are a piece of crap. And he went through and itemized what the plaintiff's experts were saying and what he agreed with and what he didn't agree with. And he was agreeing, frankly, more with what the plaintiff's expert was saying than what this company that actually built the homes was saying. If we tell people that they cannot sue for defective construction unless they're in actual privity of the contract, what's going to happen is we're going to perpetuate these bad building practices. This company, as I said, I sat in the deposition and I got the guy that was over the construction division. They had different divisions, and this was the guy that was in charge of the construction division of a company that was building hundreds of homes a year. And one of the principal complaints of construction defect had to do with poor installation, defective installation of the flashing on the roof. And asked a few questions, and it began to dawn on me that this guy didn't know what flashing was. Here's the guy that's the head of construction for a major company building hundreds of homes, and he doesn't know what flashing is or does, let alone whether it's properly installed or what it takes or anything like that. And so finally, I just came out and said, you don't know what flashing is, do you? And the opposing attorney, I object. And he's throwing out all kinds of objections that are totally meaningless. And I says, okay, now you've made your objections. I want him to answer the question. And I think all the attorneys in here know that under the rule, you cannot refuse to ask the question. There are very narrow circumstances, not applicable here. Can you refuse to answer the question? I'm directing my client not to answer the question. I have brought sanctions against an attorney, a motion for sanctions against an attorney one time in my career. I have great respect for my colleagues in the bar. Boy, they're all brighter than me. And I don't bring those kind of things lightly. But you don't tell a client under those circumstances you can't answer the question. You can't answer and tell whether you understand what a flashing is on a roof in a construction defect case. So there's policy issues on both sides of these things. I've largely represented the construction industry and defended the construction industry, but there's been times that I have been totally embarrassed and humiliated almost by some of the practices I've seen within the construction industry. And I would like to see sometime some people be successful in bringing their construction defect claims and and strengthening the industry. I'd like to see the industry, and like I said, there's a lot of really good builders, and I'd like to see more circumstances where people are able to evaluate one builder from another, and be able to tell, again, talking about my 22-year-old son buying his first home. We all have kids out there, and we all have friends that are trying to deal with the biggest purchase of their lives, and coming down with the and be able to protect themselves in this purchase. We are still waiting in one of those Kennecott cases for a motion for summary judgment to be decided. That's the townhome case. We brought our motion for summary judgment, I think, back in February, I believe. The judge indicated that she was going to get a decision within a week, and here we are. There's still no decision. I think that the plaintiff's counsel in that one had seen the motions for summary judgment in the other cases and did a much more effective job. And really, he was arguing more on the contract issues than the tort issues. But right now, I mean, there was much discussion in the panel this morning, which I thought the Babcock people were excellent. I really enjoyed their panel discussion about the industry. But I don't usually see in the Utah courts a judge taking 6, 7, 8 months to make a decision on a motion for summary judgment. But that's apparently where we are. I would like to also just say a word about our ADA presentation and the force majeure clause. In my other life, I have a partner and I that we own facilities, as the term was used this morning. We have a building that we lease to Jiffy Lube. We have one that we lease to 7-Eleven. We have one that we lease to a daycare, and we have an office building. And in my experience right now, the force majeure clauses are being largely ignored. And the reason I say this is that while there may be concern that this may all spawn more litigation, in my experience, in the short term at least, it's actually spawned just the opposite. It's spawned people trying to recognizing that we're all in a load of trouble with this. We have massive unemployment in this country. We have real problems, and I see people pulling together. The first thing we did is we called up all of our tenants and said, "How's your business?" And they told us, they sent us over the reports, and we were pretty eager to work something out with them to try and get things worked out. And I see the same thing going on in the construction industry right now. That we have people that we're going to always have assholes. I hate to use that word, but it's so appropriate. But more to the point, I see people using mediation. I see people trying to even avoid a dispute having to go to mediation. Let's sit down and work this out. We've got a delay. Well, it's understandable you have a delay. Let's work through this delay. Let's share the burden of this delay and get it worked out. That's the kind of thing that I'm seeing. Anyway, So I'm open for any questions or comments about the economic loss rule or anything else. I can't tell you how much I love the construction industry, and having spent my career in the construction industry and in land use, and many of you I've dealt with quite often, and I have found it a thoroughly enjoyable experience. I also enjoyed going to Chicago a couple of years ago to the CDDC conference, learning about the Lone Pine orders, listening to Mr. Franco. He was very enlightening and helpful, and that made me want to participate here in Utah.
It was fun to have you in Chicago. I remember well. Wasn't that a beautiful venue?
Yeah, that was great.
Greg, this is Heinz. Just a comment on that Sterling Village case you might find interesting. We tried to get the Supreme Court to make a ruling similar to Judge Faust in that memorandum decision. And I remember Justice Lee in oral argument looking at me smiling, saying, "We can rule in your favor without getting to that issue, right?" And I had to say, yeah, but a lot of people are waiting for that decision, for that issue. And he just kept smiling, and of course they didn't get to it. But they're well aware of it, obviously, and I think we should have a ruling at some point in time to give us a little bit more clarification, which should be fun.
That's very helpful. I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me that.
Just one comment on quality builders that you mentioned. One of the things that I do, and Eugene, you probably do the same thing, is I submit a grandma request and try to get all of the inspection reports from the building department if it's new enough construction. And I've found that very, very helpful. Back when I was an inspector for the county and West Jordan City, there were some builders that I literally ran the construction project, in the sense that I would write pages and pages of lists of corrections. And then there were some builders that I would have, one or two or no corrections for. And we've all, as inspectors, we've all experienced those type of contractors, and some of them have been around for a very long time. And, and my son purchased now 2 homes at 30 years old. I did that very thing, requested the inspection records, and it was very telling, and it was very valuable to him to be able to look at different builders and say, okay, I'm going to buy a home from this builder who had a history of really doing good work, and he didn't have to, pull, clients or other folks that have bought, purchased houses from this guy. So that's a great resource to look at. And Eugene, you've probably experienced that, I would imagine.
Absolutely. In fact, I got into this expert witness business after having cancer to help right some of the wrongs that my fellow builders, contractors have committed.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that I was in a deposition with the building inspector, head building inspector for South Jordan, as part of these cases, and we got talking to the builder, and he says, we asked him, if we request them, do you have all the inspections for these units out there? And he says, yes, I do have all the inspections for the construction. Unfortunately, the remedy work that is being done by the plaintiff here, they are required to come and get building permits to do that remedy work, but they haven't done it. And so I don't have inspection reports for that.
Yeah, that's always a trick. I'm working on a $250,000 backyard case right now, where they put in a deck and did some excavating and regrading and retaining walls, and they didn't pull one permit, and it's scary, the stuff that I had dealt with the guy that did this work before, and this is where I think Doppel comes into effect. I've dealt with this guy that was doing the work, that did the shoddy work, and I dealt with him throughout my, career as a building official at Salt Lake County. And this guy will get disciplined, and then he'll just move on and work for another contractor or open up another business and, in another name. And he's just, what he's doing is actually criminal in my opinion. And, but it doesn't seem that we ever get things to that point where we can see someone prosecuted criminally for that kind of a thing, which I think is a disservice, really. They're allowed to just go through and keep repeating these same things over and over again, and the end user, the homeowner, is really the one that pays the price. So these people don't have enough insurance or assets to be able to go after them in order to, make the homeowner whole or have, be able to even do the repairs. So there's a little bit of a disconnect in that end of things on those folks being made whole.
I have a comment on what Greg said about the economic loss rule, on his question of whether or not Section 5 allows a claim for negligent design or construction. I've been very successful in convincing the courts that Section 5 only is codifying the common law intentional tort exception to the economic loss rule, and does not create any opportunity to file a negligence claim for negligent design or construction. The Davencourt language is distinguishable because Davencourt, the duty to maintain and a duty to manage are not construction defect claims or design defect claims. They're not in the statutory economic loss rule. And so the Supreme Court can clearly create or announce a negligent cause of action there. But I don't think that diminishes the fact that you cannot bring a claim in negligence for defective design or construction. In terms of how this impacts insurance, I represent primarily design professionals. 2 insurers, I represent about 7 or 8 insurers regularly. 2 insurers took the position after the economic loss rule in Utah that they could issue reservations of rights for claims of defective construction because the claims were brought in contract. They couldn't be brought in negligence anymore. I wrote a piece to both of those carriers, which explains that under the SME decision, that every contract for professional services, whether it be construction services or design professional services, has an implied duty to exercise the same degree of skill and care as the rest of the profession exercises. And that implied duty in a contract is identical to the duty of negligence. And so the breach of contract that is brought against the design professional for defective construction is covered by the professional liability policies that are issued by the carriers. Both of those carriers changed their position as a result of the piece that I wrote. All the others recognized that it wasn't a problem to begin with. So at least on the design side, the economic loss rule has not impaired professional liability insurance. Those are my comments.
Greg, let me ask you something. Is the piece that you wrote about to the design carriers, is that something that you can share with others, or is that a private, confidential communication?
I wrote it for a client. I wrote it for the insurance broker. So I have a client, so I could not share it without the insurance broker's consent.
All right. Well, thank you for your comments. I found that very interesting.
And one other thing, Greg, I have a 28-year-old daughter who just bought her first house, and she asked me to review her contract. I read the contract. It was unbelievable, all of the rights that they expressly we're waiving because of the economic loss rule. And I agree with you that it's a travesty, but I would resolve that problem by expanding the implied warranty in residential construction from beyond the habitability warranty that the Supreme Court has given us to one that is more consistent. For instance, under Nevada law, under their Title 40, or California, restricting the implied warranty to simply habitability for unsafe conditions to the habitability of the structure is not sufficient. And I think that's the direction the law should go.
Thank you very much. What great comments. Good to see you, Craig.
Good to see you.
Appreciate your presentation, Greg, and those of you who have also contributed. Let's take a 5-minute break and we will come up with start our final session in about 5 minutes.
Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
You about ready, Brad?
I am ready whenever it's time.
Okay. Let me do a little preview of you.